Welcome. You are at the CCC where there are no outside issues. My name's Anthony. I'm a 7th-year doctoral student in clinical psych, an addict alcoholic, another bozo on the bus, and of course, I care about you. Each week, we'll provide and create a safe space. You know what, guys? You guys know Louis normally does this, and I just lost my place. Okay. Each week, we'll provide and create a brave space where we can engage in conversations around topics of recovery. Our intention is to hold and inspire better spaces for more people in recovery by tackling issues sometimes used to separate us. Before we do that, please like, comment, share, subscribe, and ding that bell. And now, the disclaimer. The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed on At the CCC are ours alone. We do not represent anyone but ourselves. The material and information shared here is for general information purposes only. In other words, we're just friends behind a mic here to entertain you. And so for folks at home, you're probably noticing that Louis is not here. Louis is on vacation, and that was the first time I looked at our script since he's left. But I am very excited for today's episode. We have Manny here today, and we're going to be talking about finances and recovery. But before we do that, Manny, how is your week? How are you doing?
You know, I'm doing just fine. I had the opportunity to introduce my new boyfriend to my family over the weekend.
Boyfriend?
I know.
Oh,
it's
okay.
like a month. We're a month in. It's pretty good.
That's really sweet.
And he's already met the family.
That's dope. Your family's in the area?
Yeah, they live in Nevada. It's where I grew up. So.
And did they like him?
They loved him.
Oh.
They liked him more than they liked me.
That's probably that's doubtful. I doubt I'm sure they like you a great lot, I guess. So as is kind of well, you know, actually, before I do that, my week's been great.
Oh, yeah.
You know what's funny? You didn't have to ask me that. That's like, you don't have to, steer the bus. But typically we have this like ongoing.
You're the driver here. I'm just here to like talk finances, but we can talk about your day.
Yeah, I know. Well, what's funny is that like sometimes we joke about like Louis and Bonnie Violet won't ask me how my day is going. And so I have to ask myself how the week's going. Yeah, it's...
That's really good that you're showing up for yourself.
I know. It's dramatic.
It's the relationship we have with ourselves. It's really
true.
Most important.
It's true.
Right? You can't wait for other people to give you
That's
what
right.
you need.
Right. Who's going to warm the sun? Who's going to warm the sun?
Okay.
So, but this has been a cool week for me. Yeah, just a lot of nice things. So I'm really excited about today's conversation. I'm so glad you said that you agreed to come on today. Yeah. Before we jump into that, we have 3 questions that we ask everyone who comes on.
Oh God!
And I'm going to give you 3 minutes to answer those questions. Okay. So those questions are, we'll just start off with the first one. Okay. Where did you grow up? I
already answered that.
When did you answer that? Oh, Nevada.
Ding, ding, ding.
Sorry. Go ahead. I was half listening. Go ahead.
Well, aren't you a therapist? Like, you're supposed to listen.
I am, but I'm not on the clock.
Okay. She's clocked out.
Go ahead. So you're from Nevada.
I grew up in Northern California in a very affluent, white, upper middle class neighborhood, and we were not affluent.
Yeah.
White.
Yeah. I thought you were going to say you're a Caucasian lady.
No. Well, some days. Depends on the wig. But no, yeah, like, so I felt different already.
Okay.
And then, like, this is layers. We're not even there yet. But,
Yeah.
But yeah, so I felt different already just living in that environment.
That's right. Yeah. And then the other question about, oh my God, I lost it. Okay. What made you get sober?
Ooh, to get back at an ex-husband.
Nuh-uh.
Yeah, I'm that petty bitch.
Wait a minute. Go on. So you're a vengeful sober? You, like, it was originally out of vengeance?
Yeah, right?
Say more.
Whatever gets you into the rooms, right? And it was just like, well, first it was like panic because like, damn, I got to take care of myself now.
Yeah.
Like financially.
Yeah.
So I was like, okay, so if I have to get sober in order to make this whole life in San Francisco work, I'm going to have a best goddamn life.
Yeah.
And I did. It happened.
So,
it's happening.
So when you guys broke up, you thought to yourself, like, the first thing I need to fix is my drinking?
It was definitely like part of the reason why we broke up.
Okay.
Or why, we were both kind of maybe in our own struggle.
Sure.
Right? And so we never got to a place in the relationship where we could like work on anything of like substance. And so we were literally just living in the chaos and the drama and the dysfunction on a daily basis. And it wasn't until he was like, I think we need a divorce, that I was like, okay, this is a moment. And it was that coupled with like a really bad experience at the eBay Christmas party.
Oh.
I'll tell you more about that later.
Yeah, wow.
But it was just
Okay. All right. And so then my last question is, how do you connect with your higher power?
ooh, put me on the spot. Oh my gosh. I think when I need to connect with my okay, yeah. All right. I actually learned this in early recovery when I was studying for the certified financial planner exam. Another newcomer, I called him and I was like, I'm about to go in and take this exam. He's like, okay, do you want to do the third step prayer? And I'm like sitting in my car in the parking lot somewhere in like South San Francisco. And I was like, okay, yeah, I'm going to pass now because I've done the third step prayer. But like, I love it because it's like, how can this activity that I'm participating in right now serve someone else?
Right.
Right? Because it's so easy for me to just be like so self-centered.
Yeah. I love that. I mean, maybe this is a conversation we can like talk offline, but one of the things my sponsor told me really early on, and it's how I live my life, is like how, like in living my life, how can I constantly be of service? So even if it's something like working out, it's like, how can I work out to be of service? Oh, to be healthy so that I can show up for other people.
Totally. Yeah. If you're like in the best mind space, then you're less of an asshole, Anthony.
That's right.
My experience.
Oh, like, are you coming for me? I'm like, is Louis like in your ear? Because I feel like Louis is here. Thanks for answering those questions. Okay, so before we jump into the conversation, some fun facts that I came across. Maybe not fun is not the right word to use here, but some facts that I came across regarding finances. So,
okay, not about me.
Not about you. you can send back. I was like thinking about finances, and one of the things that I remember learning years ago was that there was no other topic, for example, in the Bible that's talked more about than money, right? So I came across some statistics, and about 15% of like Jesus's teachings were about money. Then you look at places like Hinduism and Hinduism, there's 4 goals, but in one of those goals, it's called Arth. I hope I'm saying that correctly, and it has to do with like material wealth and prosperity. And the idea behind that is that, you should have pleasure and enjoyment, and you should live a righteous and good life and do good deeds, and that money enables that, right? Among the Buddhists, for example, there's the encouragement of redistributing and using money virtuously. And then in Islam, there are 5 pillars, and one of them has to do with charity. And so there's the giving. I think that the number is like 2.5% of your income to charity or to poor people.
2.5.
2.5, yeah. And I think
specific.
it is very specific. And but the point is like I bring that up because it's interesting, because money is this thing that it can be very private, right? Like it can be a very private thing. Some people
Especially
don't,
in our society,
right?
definitely.
Some people don't talk about money, or when people think about money, they're just thinking about debt. They aren't. A lot of what we know about money, we know through relationships with their parents. So sometimes there's, like financial literacy was not something like we learned. Like, what the hell is credit? How do you influence credit, et cetera, et cetera.
Absolutely.
Et cetera. So it's certainly something that's like pervasive, and it is in so many different parts of our lives. So I want to start our conversation by asking you, what is it that you do?
So I'm a certified financial planner.
Okay.
And I have started to incorporate like a life coaching component to that. So that means that as I'm helping people make decisions about their financial life, like I'm incorporating like a holistic view about that person. So I'm not just looking at like, how do we optimize a portfolio, or how do we save for a goal, like if they want to buy a house, for example. I want to take like a step back and be like, okay, like what kind of life does this person envision for themselves that includes this house, like in terms of like fulfillment?
Okay.
Right? Because I've met in my work like a lot of rich, miserable people, right? I can help you get to the point where you have the resources and like you feel good about how much you're making and how much you're earning and your savings and stuff. But like, do you feel good about yourself as a person? And I think that's what's been missing in financial planning up to this point. And so I've married the two. And I think when people think of financial planners, they think like, oh, I'm just going to tell them like what not to spend money on and like which mutual fund to buy. And it's so much more than that. In fact, like the most interesting thing about money and people for me is not how much they have, but their relationship to it. It's like fascinating.
So let's, you've said a few interesting things that I want to go back to.
Sure.
So one of the things is you said it's so much more than that. What do you mean when you say it's so much more than that?
Yeah, so you kind of touched on it when you were talking about like we inherit these stories that we tell ourselves about money because yes, it is not taught at school. It is not taught in a formal education setting. I just gave a presentation to a bunch of PhD dentists and they're like, yeah, in all the years of school, like your 45-minute presentation on financial wellness has been the only conversation I've had about this kind of stuff. And you also talked about it when you said, like, we don't talk about it in the society. It's impolite, right? So we've inherited all of these, like, taboo or it's taboo to talk about money is, like, one of the stories our society tells ourselves about it, right? And I just lost my train of thought.
It's okay. We were talking about taboo. Well, one of my follow-up questions to that is like, how do you begin to have a conversation about money, like either with yourself or someone else? Like, how do you even start to think about your finances?
Yeah, I guess, I mean, it's just like I borrow this actually from recovery. It's like you have to be honest with yourself. Like, are you ready to do it? And much of financial planning is requiring like an inventory. So you have to go through and look at like the decisions you've made in the past. And you try to do it like non-judgmentally, just like you would do like a fourth step, right? Like you just are an observer of your behavior and you're looking at trends. And what I'm looking for is, does this person have like a spending problem? You know, is this person coping with something much larger with shopping or deprivation? So that's what I mean by it's so much more than just like what ends up in your bank account or what you see like on your brokerage account. It's so much more.
So it's interesting because one of the things I'm hearing you say is that spending is a symptom. So for example, so when you're talking about the fourth step, for folks who may not be familiar with the fourth step, so the fourth step is a step in 12 step where basically you're looking at your life, you're looking at times where you've had resentments toward people, and you're really distilling that to kind of its simplest parts to see what parts of that came from you and how can you address that. So for example, sometimes like one of the things on my resentment list is pride. So pride has often got in the way of my making decisions or asking for help, right? Mm-hmm. And so that may have showed up in a situation where like, you know, I get into a fight with, I get into an argument with someone, and then you distill it down and it's pride, right? But it showed up as like this fight. So what I'm hearing you say is that if you look at someone's spending habits, if that's where someone wants to begin to look at their financial health, looking at their spending habits, you might be able to notice like, I noticed that you're actually spending money you don't have. Yeah. Right. And like, and so maybe a question you might ask is like, what is motivating you to spend that money?
Yeah, that's part of it too. Yeah. But maybe like, let's take a positive take on it, right? Okay. Because when I'm usually starting this conversation with clients, you know, they're coming to me and they have like a specific goal in mind, which is a great place to start, right? Like, what are your financial goals? And like I said, like, what does it look like to have a fulfilling life a year from now? 3 years from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, like paint that picture for me in like vivid color about what that looks like. And then we have this discussion about like pulling out values so that when you're making your financial goals, they're not just like, you're just throwing them out, you know what I mean? Like,
yeah, I do know it. So I want to go back to the conversation we had off air, which is you talked about like the realm of control. Yeah. Right. Yeah. And can you explain a little bit about like the realm of control and then how that relates to your goals?
Yeah. So
what is the realm of control?
Yeah. So, you know, in like any kind of like psychology, right? We talk about like what's within your realm of control. And in finance, it's the same thing, right? Like, I can't control what the market's going to do. I can't control the geopolitical climate. I can't control if the interest rates are going to go up. Like all of those factors are out of my control. But what I can control is how much I save, where I save, maybe what investments I pick, right? So there's still a lot within my control.
Okay.
So the reason why I bring that up is, I have clients who are like, oh my God, like I'm so nervous. There's all this talk about the debt ceiling. And are you concerned? And I can take a step back and be like, that's not your money story. Like that is the broader, the nation's financial story, but that is like not your story.
So that's interesting, right? Because I'm wondering how that applies, so for example, living in San Francisco, many people, if they have one job, they're working a lot of hours, or if they aren't working one job and a lot of hours, they're working two jobs, right? And so a lot of folks might, in San Francisco and other areas, might feel like they don't have a disposable income and they don't have a lot of money, so they don't have to worry about the debt ceiling and they don't have to worry about interest rates, right? So would you say that like a person who might might think that they don't have a lot of money, could they still be financially healthy? Like what does that look like?
100%. You're a very smart person and you've probably come across this in your work, but like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, like if your basic needs aren't being met, you could care less about what else is happening out in like the greater world, right? So if cash flow is an issue for you, maybe it's not talking about like investments per se, but it's just like, how do we make sure that we're even at the end of every month and that I'm not spending in a deficit and getting myself into more trouble? And like that kind of conversation requires honesty.
Okay.
And like a willingness to like look at maybe the information, because I can't help anybody who's not willing to look at like the numbers, honest numbers.
This is really interesting to me because what you're talking about sounds very recovery.
Oh, 100%.
Like when you're talking about like money and how people are spending money or like their relationship to money, it sounds so much like what's actually going on with you, Money
is a way for us to exchange energy, right? Like the time and energy I put into my job helping people helps me go buy sourdough bread because I don't fucking know. I don't know.
You can curse.
I don't know how to bake sourdough bread, right? Like that's not the highest and best use of my time. That's not where my specialization and my skills lie. But so that's why it shows up.
Can you say more about that? I feel like there's something really nuanced here that's worth kind of like highlighting. So you're to say that like money is the way we exchange energy with each other. Like is there like an underlying, can you say more about that?
Yeah. Let me give it a little bit more thought. So what I mean by that is it's just a means for us to do things, right? It's not the end all be all. Like if I come across people who are like, I just want to have a portfolio that like creates a lot of money. I'm like, why? I want to get to the why, right? So money is not the why, at least the way I want my clients to be thinking about it. I want them to be thinking about what does this money get me in terms of fulfillment, in terms of honoring my values? Like, is it in the process of, or like, is it in service of getting me closer to those things?
So what makes the why question important? Like, what about the why question?
Yeah, because I want people to be really, really clear about their motivations. Because like most things, like you can inherit them from other people that like you personally, maybe like that was not maybe an original goal or not a goal for you. And maybe that's why it's so hard for you to reach that goal. It's not your goal.
It's not yours.
Someone imprinted that onto you. So when someone's like, oh, I really want to buy a house in San Francisco. Why?
Yeah.
Why?
Right.
It's like, oh, like I want to get.
Well, let's follow that. Can you maybe give an example? That's fascinating. So can you give an example of a time where you met with a client, obviously not disclosing too much about them, a time you met with a client where what they were asking for actually didn't align with what they actually truly valued or what they wanted for themselves?
Well, okay, I can think about this example right now. And I have a client who is new to our office and sweet person, has a 2-bedroom apartment, single person. And I asked, like, why do you have a 2-bedroom? Like, that's like $60K a year in rent. And he's like, I'm holding out for my kids to like maybe one day visit me. Right. And so this is like
So
I know,
heavy.
right?
That's so heavy. Yeah.
So, like you can't talk about money and not talk about people. Right. So in his mind, holding out, like paying extra for this apartment that's too big for him is like his wanting to fulfill this other value of like closeness with his family, a good relationship with his children, right? And so is that still in alignment if it's like detrimental actually to his financial plan? Those are things you got to examine.
Can I tell you, you know what that reminds me of? It's like the role that guilt plays or shame plays. So what I mean by that is like, we can have an experience with something, right? I did something, I fucked up, right? And I can acknowledge that I fucked up and I can change my behavior. But what makes that difficult is like if I add guilt and shame to it. And so I might use guilt and shame to kind of replay to myself and to prove to myself that I somehow know better, like I think that's kind of how it functions for most people. So the connection I'm making here is that to hold out a room, for example, that isn't being used, that you look at every day, that isn't filled, it almost feels like a form of punishment, right? It makes me like, when I think of something like that, I was like, oh, wow, you are essentially using your money to like, almost like punish yourself for this thing that doesn't exist, right? Because if you walk that out, right? Like actually, if you got rid of the apartment and you moved into something smaller and more sustainable for yourself, you're actually you're saving money that you could potentially use for something good, or in other words, like a different way of exchanging that energy.
Yeah. And I'll follow that thread. Like what if instead that, extra grand that you're paying for that room that you don't use is just like money you use to travel to go see your kids?
Right.
And spend a weekend with them.
Right.
Does that get you closer to your goal of fulfillment, closeness with your family?
Right.
Probably does. And it's going to be a lot cheaper than holding out, like having this room for no reason.
Right.
So it's just like asking yourself honestly, like, are the things that I am paying for in alignment with my values? And yeah, like we were talking about values clarification. Where do you spend your money on? That's what you value.
Interesting. So I want to go back a little bit, right? So when I'm assuming that there was a time in your life where your finances weren't perfect, or when
what makes you think they're perfect now?
Fair enough. Maybe it's your purple shirt, but like, there was a time in your life where they didn't look like that. So maybe can you say a little bit about like what your financial health looked like when you were drinking and using?
Ooh. Yes. So I am a people pleaser.
Okay.
Recovering people pleaser. What does that mean? You take your credit card out and you buy everybody around you a round of drinks. You put it on a credit card and you tell yourself, I'm going to deal with this later. When I got sober, I had to deal with the ramifications of this financial wreckage, essentially, that I caused. And it took a while to get out of that. And it was like the best teacher of like what I wanted to avoid. But it was a behavior of wanting to have this status and to show people like,
I
hey,
can take care of you.
Yeah. Like, or like, hey, look at me, like validate me because I can buy you things in this transaction. Be my friend. I'm buying friendship, right? Like that is deeply wounded
of course
behavior.
Yeah.
And that stuff had long-term consequences because of the debt you rack up. Like I took vacations so I could be seen on Instagram doing all the things, but no real salary to support that kind of lifestyle. And it wasn't until I got sober where I became like real, right? Because everything becomes very vividly clear to you. Like there's dysfunction in your life that is like a result of your drinking behavior or your drink or like the thinking, right? It's, yeah.
That reminds me. So, and going back to, learning behaviors, like, so for example, like, let's talk about love for a second, right? So we love the way that we were taught to love, right? And there's a great book. It's called
You're taking it all over the place, right?
Yeah. I
We're taking
mean,
money, love.
I mean, it's all connected, right?
All right, keep going.
So on Loving by Bell Hooks, I think that's the title, On Loving by Bell Hooks. One of the things that she talks about is, God, I hope I'm not confusing books, but one of the things that she talks about is that many of us have to accept that as children and as younger people, we weren't loved. We were cared for.
Oh, yeah.
There was food on the table.
Yes.
You know, there was clothes, but we weren't loved.
Yes.
And the way she talks about love is that love is spiritually nurturing someone and helping them grow.
Yes. Right? I grew up in an immigrant family, and the bare minimum was met for sure. Right. But did someone sit next to me, like in first grade, to read a book with me? That's probably what I needed.
Right.
But I had lunch and I had dinner and a roof, that was met.
Exactly. And that's what I think about. It's like my family didn't have the energy to, or the wherewithal to do those things. Right. But the way
to
they,
be fair, exactly.
Right. Like to
working.
Yeah.
All
like
the jobs.
like to attend to like one's mental health. I mean, like one of the things I've heard of is like, when you're living in poverty, no one has the money or the finances or the, like to go and like, I'm going to go see this therapist right now who might be down the block.
Yeah. Just think about like all the privilege that you have to even be able to sit in front of a professional. Right. Even if your insurance is paying for it, you've got to have the time to take off so you can take.
And then like the energy. Yeah. Then there's also the energy that comes with that. So I bring that up because one of the things that growing up is my dad was a provider. My family, they were providers, you know, and that was like, that's what I learned. And so I learned that that's how you express connection. And so I did the same thing, when I was drinking and using, like I wanted you to feel taken care of, and so I was like, I was like spending my rent money. I was laying down a credit card that I had no business laying down, I was like, and I didn't have, and I remember like in recovery, like one of the hardest things I had to do was be like, no, you know what, we need to split this because I can't, you know what I mean? And to not feel like I'm causing someone harm by doing that.
Oh yeah.
Just being real about your friend.
I mean, honestly, just being an adult is like unlearning all the bullshit craziness you grew up with. Right. And part of that is knowing that inherently you have worth regardless of whether or not you have money. Like I make it a point in my office that when we talk about net worth, that I say financial net worth, like not your worth as a person. Those are separate. And that took me time to like delineate that, like what I have in my bank account does not determine if I'm a good person.
Yeah. Let's talk more about that. Right.
Yeah,
so let's talk more about that. So that's quite a statement to say that like I have value.
Well, I think about the person who was buying all the drinks for the people who could not afford to actually be buying all the drinks. That person did not have the self-worth, self-love enough to be like, wait, I love myself too much to put myself through this financial trauma later or this financial dysfunction. So I'm going to not put my credit card down. Like that person did not exist in that situation or that scenario. But a healthier person, a person who's like really secure about like, I don't give a fuck if these people say shit about me not buying them a drink or buying them a drink, right? Like then that person is less likely to like get themselves into trouble financially because they're already living in a world where like the outside does not determine how they validate themselves.
Right.
Yeah.
So how does a person do that? Like how does a person begin to cultivate like a sense of value, right? Because what I'm hearing is there's very little of it has to do with like the actual kind of like cash money. It has to do with like how someone like their relationship with themselves first. So like how does a person, like in your experience, how does a person begin to do that thing, right?
To like heal like the
like how does a person begin to like, okay, you know what, I like listened to this podcast and Manny said that maybe I have a shitty relationship with myself, like how does a person begin to,
well,
what like suggestion would you have for someone?
There's a sister program.
Same. What makes you bring up the sister program?
There's a program called Debtors Anonymous.
Okay.
And it's, it follows the same 12 steps that we do. You just replace the word alcohol with debt or crediting or, lending, whatever it may be. But it addresses the dysfunction that people have with money. And sobriety, as defined in that, is like not putting things on, not having or not incurring any new unsecured debts. You can like have a house and a car, but like the person at the bar putting a lot of charges on their credit card, like that's unsecured debt.
Can you define that? What's unsecured debt?
Yeah. So there's two types of debt. There's secured debt and unsecured debt. Secured debt is secured by like a piece of property.
Oh, right.
Right.
Okay.
So your house, if you don't pay the bills, they take the house. If you don't pay the bills for your car, they take the car. Those are secured debts. It's the unsecured debts where people get into trouble, right? That's like the personal loans and the credit cards. It's really easy. And okay, here, to be fair, like the way the financial system is set up, you are not set up to be successful. Like there's a lot of like you've got to be vigilant. Like,
say more about that.
Yeah, you just got to be vigilant. Like everybody out there that's offering a deal, like there's a catch. There's a catch, right? And I'm not trying to like have you go out into the world and be really super pessimistic, but someone is making money somewhere in that transaction, right? Like I've been like looking at like phone plans because it's time for an upgrade, and I'm like looking at the fine print, and I'm like, dang, 3-year contract. I'm like, where's the catch? Like I'm looking for it, and I've learned to be that like diligent consumer because we're not trained to be that way. Like if you just sit back and watch the commercials that are played for you and the ads that you see on Instagram and Facebook, like there is a system behind all of that is trying to show you that like if you do not buy this thing that we've put in front of you, you're not going to be happy. And it plays on those like very human things, like you're not going to be popular, the person buying the drinks. Like if you don't buy this thing we're trying to sell you on Instagram, you're not going to get all the things. So
yeah,
I don't know if that answers your question.
No, it most certainly does answer my question. I mean, yeah, marketing. I mean, the kind of the spirit of marketing is to create a feeling of lack so that you consume, right?
100%, right?
Yeah.
So we're like the most hyper consumer culture out there, right? So you are not designed to be successful. And you think about the people who are successful with money, it's because they were taught to be successful with money, and it's like passed down. So what happens to those people who grew up in situations where what was passed down were really bad money habits, right? That's your job as an adult now. And if you're in recovery, like that's your job. That's part of your healing journey, is to unlearn those behaviors, because at the crux of it is just, how do I better take care of myself? Financial wellness is one of those pieces.
What would you say are some warning signs that like maybe a person's financial health isn't good? Like what are some of the symptoms
sure.
of like, oh, maybe I should look at this?
Yeah, right. So one of the things that I ask my clients is like, if you put something, like if you charge something on a credit card versus like charging it on your debit card, like does it feel different? Like, are you more...
The answer is yes. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Like it's way more easy to spend $500 on a credit card than it is to like pull out $500 from the ATM and hand that over. Why is that different? And if that's different for you, that's like something you need to look at, right? Because somewhere in your mind, that bucket of money is different. That dollar from the credit card is not the same as the dollar in your bank account. At the end of the day, it is. And actually, it's more expensive on the credit card side because now you have interest added onto that. So whatever costs you $1 in real life is now $1.25 or whatever the interest rate is. Does that make sense?
Right. That does make sense. How are we? Do we have? Okay, we've got 10 minutes. Okay, because I have follow-up questions.
Oh, okay.
When you say, for example, like that people should be like vigilant consumers, what are things that people should look for? Right. So you were saying you know, like it'll create like some things will say like the kind of messages you're not going to be popular or cool or whatever. Like, so what are some things people should look for? How can they begin to be like to be sober consumers? Like, how can you
that's a really good way
use
to
sobriety
coin it.
to address your financial health?
I guess it's like anything. You want to ask yourself, like, what am I ultimately trying to get out of this situation? Or what am I actually after? Right? So if you're really clear on like your values and your motivation behind a specific transaction or a purchase, you know, like, why do you want to go on that trip? Yeah. Why do you want to buy your friend that specific kind of present?
Right. So can you then, I know this is going to seem like a non sequitur, but you have to trust me here. So can you then tell me what your financial life looks like now, like as a person in recovery?
Ooh, yeah. So
how are things changed?
Yeah. So part of that is in some respects like a daily inventory. And I use like software to help me look at like, where did the money go? Right. And I use software that just like tracks my spending. And that is a practice of like, that was something I had to learn to do for myself. And it took like a little bit of maturity. It's not the most fun thing in the world. And it's definitely sobering when I see like, this is what you spent, and this is what you have, this is what you anticipate coming in on and all those things. It's like, it is, yeah, so the tracking is like one of the biggest pieces.
So what do you do with that information? Like, so now, because what you're describing sounds kind of like just like a daily inventory.
Yeah.
So now you know, like, okay, you're like, I spend X amount of money, I don't have X amount of money, or like, I guess I'm trying to, yeah.
Okay, so here's a good way to look at it. Okay, like lately, I've been like, I really want to go to this one store, and like, I don't need any new things like for clothes. But like, there's a feeling in me right now that's like, I really want to go to that store and I want to go shopping. And like, the real question is like, why? Right? Mm-hmm. Like from earlier, like, why is that pang to spend coming up for me in this moment right now? And I can point to like 10 other things right now that are giving me stress or like stressful. And in the past, spending has been a coping mechanism for anxiety and stress, right? And so it's coming up for me. And there's a part of me that knows better. There's a part of me that's like, you don't need any more stuff. Like you literally just brought a whole IKEA bag of stuff to like Goodwill. Like you do not need more stuff. But the other part, this part of me is like, but you'll feel so much better after you go buy something.
That's interesting because it's the same thing like with food. It's the same thing with like drinking.
100%.
Yeah, it's like this will make you feel better. Then the other side of that is, when do you know that you're making a good purchase? Like how do you know when like, okay, that was a good idea?
Yeah, and like do you feel good about it? Like if there's any tinge of like shame or regret, then maybe that's something that needs to be looked at. But
yeah, well, that's interesting. That's like it's kind of crazy that we're landing on because that's also really complicated, because there have been times where like I've had to make big purchases. Like there are things like I have to buy, right? Like I moved into a new place and I bought like a really nice mattress and a really nice bed, and I felt so guilty after making that purchase, and it was well within my budget, you know?
It's tricky, right? It's really tricky because you can also slip into this part of spending. It's a money script. It's called money vigilance, where like it's painful to spend money on yourself. Like, so that's the extreme opposite of someone who is maybe like a money worshiper or like a money status driven person. You have this money vigilant person who's like, I don't deserve a new mattress. And so like this idea
so they're like sleeping on the floor. Yeah.
Or like it's the mattress they've had for like a decade. But like what comes up in that is like, you feel like you do not deserve to have nice things. Like if the finances check out, like go for it. I am not the person that ever says like, don't spend your money on that. I'm not that kind of financial planner. I show my clients like, okay, here are the facts. You tell me what you want to do, right? And that alone, that like act of like inventory and like willingness to be honest with yourself, that is usually by itself enough to get people to change behavior.
Yeah. It sounds like, I love like where we're landing with this. It sounds like, that like with anything, it sounds like the best place to start is like the truth. And the truth starts with like very kind of like a simple question, which is why am I making this purchase? Why do I have this feeling?
Yeah.
Right. And it also sounds like there are also things that like we don't go at alone. Right. Like, at least like with the 12-step model, like we're working with sponsors. So my last question to you is, how do you determine like a person who's trustworthy, to talk to someone about your finances? Like, how do you form that relationship?
If you've ever like looked for a therapist, sometimes you meet a lot. You have to kind of like date a few to get a good sense. Also, I would just ask for references. Ask your friends and family. Like, let's as a society get over this idea that like money is a taboo subject and be like, hey, who do you talk to about your money stuff? Because I have a few questions. Do you trust them? Can I get their number?
Yeah, I love that. So it's you don't go at it alone.
Yeah, you don't have to.
Very good. Any kind of final thoughts before we wrap up? Anything you want folks to know or hear? Or?
Yeah, that your financial net worth is not like your worth as a person. Like, get really clear on separating those things. I like challenge you to look at your like top 10 values and see how your spending matches up. Right. Like, that's really an enlightening experience.
And if people want to learn more about you or is there a way for folks to contact you?
Yeah, you just go to MannyApollonio.com and...
Can you spell that for people?
Sure. It's
Apolloni?
MannyApollonio.com, and you can reach out to me there. We can have a conversation.
Thank you, Manny. That's awesome. So we're going to start wrapping up. I'm looking over at Brandon because there's some stuff that's going to pop up here. So Manny's web address is on there.
Oh, it's 1P.
It's 1P. So for folks at home, it's W. Oh, wait. Brandon's going to do it again. Thank you, Brandon. So it's Manny. How do you say your last name?
Apollonio.
Apollonio.
Like
so
apple and onion. Apollonio.
Apollonio. Okay. All right. So, so Don Lee, how does having a higher power figure into financial recovery?
Oh, great question, Don.
Oh gosh. Was that question there before?
Okay.
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
So,
go ahead.
There's a lot of people who, like, if you're like in a really bad financial situation, I always believe that like everything is temporary. It's like a Buddhist idea, right? Like everything is temporary. This shitty financial situation you find yourself in is temporary, and it's presented to you as an opportunity to learn, right? Your higher power has put this in front of you for a reason. What is the lesson?
That's wonderful. Don Lee, thank you so much for that question. It was actually something we talked about before the camera started rolling. So I love that we're returning back to higher power. Brandon, are there any other comments you want to let through while we're... Lewis says, hey, Manny and Anthony, miss you all. Oh, hi, Lewis.
Hi, Lewis.
Anka says, thanks, Manny. That was great. Hi, Anthony. Hi, Anka. Thank you, everyone at home, for listening. The Castro Country Club is a safe and sober community center for all people and a refuge for the LGBTQ recovery community. We provide programs and services that help people change their lives by supporting personal growth. Our vision is to reduce the suffering of addiction by connecting people to our community, opportunity, and support. You can find more information, including all the ways to contact us, at www.castrocountryclub.org/podcast. Tune in every Tuesday at 4 p.m. Pacific Standard Time when we go live on our Castro Country Club Facebook and YouTube channels. Find us wherever you listen to podcasts. Bye.
Bye.